Welcome back to our podcast series, episode number 3. I'm Captain Barry Sadler, and the podcast today is all about the MLC amendments that are due to come into force in December 2024. The Maritime Labour Convention itself was a convention that initially came into force way back in 2013. Quite a contentious convention, really. It required flag states to put in place various, if you like, rights for seafarers so that when they worked on ships they weren't abandoned by ship owners, and port state control officers had the tools necessary to enforce decent working and living conditions on board the ships that they inspected in port. The Maritime Labour Convention itself looks to enforce the basic rights of a seafarer, and seafarer within MLC has 4 basic rights. That's the basic right to a safe working environment, the basic right to good working and living conditions on board, the basic right for fair terms of employment on board the ship, and the basic right for health and social security. This includes the provision of medical care where necessary and ensuring that the seafarer is paid on time and records kept of the amount of money that they earn. Good working and living conditions means that they are provided with adequate sleeping facilities, that they are provided with recreational facilities where appropriate, that they enjoy on board a varied diet with good quality food which complies with the flag state's legislative requirements. Fair terms of employment requires every seafarer to be given a seafarer's employment agreement, and that seafarer's employment agreement is essentially approved by the flag state through their surveys and audits that they do for the issue of the Maritime Labour Certificate, and in particular by looking at the Declaration of Maritime Labour Certificate Part 2, where the owner declares exactly what terms and conditions they are placing upon seafarers. Perhaps most importantly is that the Maritime Labour Convention recognises a seafarer's right to a safe working environment and places responsibilities on flag states to put in place legislation to ensure that health and safety on board ships is dealt with in an appropriate manner. This convention came into force in August 2013 after a pretty much 6-year lead-in period waiting for various flag states to ratify the convention. It took a while. For a lot of flag states, acknowledging the rights of a seafarer was a big deal. It brought into spotlight perhaps where that flag state legislation was deficient in its own rights ashore, no matter on board ships. And so it took a long time for MLC to be adopted. The main reason for that, as I say, because a lot of flag states had to put in place a lot of changes both to their legislation and to the way that they treat people in general. Since it came into force in 2013, the Maritime Labour Convention has gone through lots of changes. We have built upon, if you like, the foundations that the ILO put in place way back when it was first adopted, and slowly added to those changes so that we are reaching a goal of seafarers working happily on board ships without jumping there in one leap, and therefore perhaps putting off flag states who don't have the amount of resources that perhaps the more developed states have. The recent amendments that are due to come into force on the 23rd of December 2024 do contain some quite important changes, and some of which are hitting the media because they deal with a seafarer's right, if you like, to the provision of internet. I'm just going to go through these changes very, very quickly and highlight them so that you know exactly what to expect after the 23rd of December, and in particular, if you're a seafarer listening to this, ensuring that your seafarer's employment agreement reflects these changes as they are slowly but surely brought about. Seafarers that are placed on board a ship by a recruitment agency, from December they must be told of their rights under that system to financial protection that is established by private recruitment and placement agencies to compensate for seafarers' monetary losses. So if you are a seafarer that is placed on board a ship, that you've gone to a recruitment agency and there are monetary losses that you incur from the placement that you've been given, bearing in mind that the recruitment agency must not place you on vessels that are unprepared to uphold MLC, then they must have in place a system to compensate a seafarer if they lose money due to this placement. Repatriation conditions have been changed, but this is more about the individual coastal states and their obligation to allow seafarers to be repatriated, particularly when ships have been abandoned or ships have gone bust and are no longer earning. Then the seafarer must still be repatriated. The individual coastal state cannot implement any kind of restriction on that repatriation based upon how they want the vessel to be manned. The big change, as I say, the headline change, if you like, is a change to regulations 3.1 and 4.4, which talk about accommodation and recreational facilities. And to quote, it is to improve mental health by ensuring social connectivity so that ship owners, so far as reasonably practical, must provide seafarers on board their ships with internet. Charges, if any, must be reasonable. States are to do the same for seafarers on board ships in their ports and anchorages. Quite a lot of people are playing on this so far as reasonably practicable statement. It's almost impossible for a modern ship to operate these days without being connected to some sort of data connection that allows the internet to operate as a server or any other data connection, so that systems on board the ship can be updated with their sister systems ashore and on servers. So a ship will have an internet connection of some description. So to say that it's as far as reasonably practicable means that pretty much every owner is bound to do it. Why? Because the internet's already on the ship, and therefore it is reasonably practicable for that ship owner to give access to the internet for the purposes of their seafarers. It's interesting that the regulations talk about social connectivity. In other words, there's no obligation for the owner to provide the seafarer with direct access to the World Wide Web, but to data and internet services that allow social connectivity, such as messaging services and video and data telephone services. So we're not saying that the owners need to risk their cyber security by allowing seafarers to surf whatever they want to surf and when they want to surf it. It's more about ensuring that seafarers have access to the internet so that they can run these social programs and be able to communicate with loved ones ashore. Food and catering also see some changes. The provision of drinking water on board has always been a requirement of the Maritime Labour Convention, but the safest drinking water often comes in bottles, and it was found that some ship owners were charging their seafarers for that bottled water. That cannot be done, and the water provided, albeit in bottled form, must be provided to seafarers on board free of charge. Medical care comes under scrutiny as well, but this is mainly again about member states ensuring prompt access to medical care rather than any particular extra onuses being put on ship owners or indeed on seafarers themselves. Health and Safety and Accident Prevention Regulation 4.3. This has changed, and this is a big overdue change in my opinion. Seafarers must be provided with appropriately sized personal protective equipment. Now, the main problem with PPE, as was on board ships, is that PPE was designed for male seafarers. Female seafarers have different size proportions, different shaped bodies, and the PPE was not protecting them in the way that it should. And so seafarers being provided with appropriately sized personal protective equipment was a lot about ensuring that the PPE was suitable for both male and female seafarers, and if a piece of PPE wasn't one size fits all, that the owner provided male and female seafarers with the specific PPE to fit their personal sizes. This is something that is quite important for owners to recognise and to amend on board their ships. Interestingly, within this as well, the death of a seafarer must be recorded and reported by member states to the ILO for publication on a global register. So this is the ILO's attempt to monitor deaths on board ships. Again, this is a good thing. Yeah, monitoring deaths on board ships allows the ILO to move forward with legislation to prevent those deaths from happening. The last change was a very, very minor change that not many of us will need to be too concerned about, and is more aimed at the port state officers that inspect ships, so port state control officers. There was a little idiosyncrasy on the Declaration of Maritime Labour Compliance, where ship owners on the DMLC did not necessarily match the ship owner on the continuous synopsis record. This was a technicality due to things like charter parties and other contractual obligations in which the ship owner was listed as a different person in different guises, if you like, on different contracts. And there is a slight amendment that allows for port state control officers to accept that there may be this difference between the ship owner named on some documents and the ship owner named on other documents. As long as compliance is there with the Maritime Labour Convention, the identification of the ship owner is as per the DMLC Part 2. That's the ship owner's declaration, and whoever that comes from is the ship owner as designated and detailed within the Maritime Labour Convention itself. In other words, that is the person who is directly responsible for the implementation of the MLC on board ships. Slowly but surely, as a pilot, I am seeing conditions improving on board ships. But what I'm really happy to report is that, okay, we get on some ships where we could tell the crew are unhappy. They may be unhappy for lots of different reasons. They may have had a rough time preparing for the port. They may have had a hard working schedule. They may have been to a port that wasn't particularly nice. They might have had a rough crossing. There are lots of reasons why you meet ship owners on ships as a pilot and they're not as engaged or as buoyant as you would really imagine them to be or like them to be. But in my humble opinion, when I board a ship, I see a lot more content seafarers now than I did, let's say, 20 years ago. I've been a pilot for 24 years now. And so I've been boarding ships on and off for a long time. And I've seen a very, very wide spectrum of the seafaring community. And I can tell when a ship is a happy ship or when a ship is an unhappy ship. And I am pleased to report that a lot of ships I go on now, everybody's very, very buoyant. They say hello with a smile on their face. They come across as happy and content in their work. And although you see them working hard, and in working hard they're concentrating, and it takes some of the joy out of being at sea when you do have to work hard, particularly under difficult circumstances. In general, I think morale is improving on board ship. We sometimes lay into the latest generations because of their over-reliance on the internet and their over-reliance on data and devices. But as a seafarer, if you have the possibility to have access to the internet and access to social connectivity, why would you not want that? Being a seafarer is a very, very hard job. You are away from home for extended periods of time, and you don't see loved ones for months on end. Particularly if you've got young children, they can grow up, they can become different people whilst you're away at sea, and this can be heartbreaking on your return. Why would we not encourage use of the internet on board the ship for social connectivity to allow seafarers to maintain better connections with those at home? Just because we didn't have it back in the good old days, as they say, doesn't mean that modern seafarers should be denied that basic right of being able to communicate effectively, making the most of modern communication techniques, to interact with loved ones at home, to watch children grow up, to ensure that their well-being and in particular their mental health is maintained through these really important communications. Yes, the new generation of seafarers may rely on devices more, but those devices enable them to serve vital roles at sea whilst maintaining a good, healthy balance of work life. Much healthier than it was years ago. The ability to come up on WhatsApp, Skype, whatever you want. Talk to your wife, talk to your children, talk to your parents, talk to anybody else that you miss or that you wish to assure is a right. And it's something that can only enhance seafarers' lives. A seafarer that is happy is more likely to be awake and alert. And awake and alert seafarers are the ones that are the safest. They're watching their surroundings. They are concentrating on doing things safely. If the seafarer doesn't have that social contact and does have the restriction of being made to feel very, very lonely whilst they're at sea, then that depression, that feeling of sadness can cause you to miss important facts. I believe happy seafarers are safe seafarers, and the provision of internet communication with the shore is a massive, massive step in the right direction. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope you enjoyed the views that were expressed. Keep tuning in for future podcasts. We will publish them as soon as we make them and try and make them as relevant and as interesting as possible, dealing with the latest issues that affect not just the examination and learning of seafarers, but seafarers' life in general and the shipping industry as a whole. Thanks again for listening, everyone. We'll catch you on the next episode.